My daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "Honestly, Ted, the best thing you could do for us right now is just not be around." She didn't yell it. That's what got me. She said it the way you'd tell someone the Wi-Fi password. Calm. Casual. Like she'd been holding it in her mouth for months and finally just let it fall out. My son was standing right there. He didn't say a word. I drove home that night with the radio off. 41 miles. I counted everyone. Let me back up because none of this makes sense without the before. My wife, Donna, passed 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. We had 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. 11 weeks isn't enough time to say everything you want to say, but it's enough time to know exactly what you're losing. After she was gone, it was just me and the house we'd lived in for 23 years. The one in Clarksburg, West Virginia, with the wraparound porch she always said she was going to put a swing on. She never got to do that. My son. I'll call him my son because that's still what he is, even now, was 34 when Donna passed. He'd been living out in Columbus, Ohio for about 5 years at that point. Good job, software company. Decent apartment. He called every Sunday. We weren't estranged or anything like that. We were just living our separate lives the way fathers and adult sons do. Then he met Vivienne. I want to be fair here. In the beginning, Vivienne was fine. She was sharp, well-dressed, the kind of woman who always knew exactly what to order at a restaurant and never second-guessed it. My son was crazy about her. You could see it. The way he sat up a little straighter when she walked into a room, the way he laughed louder, the way he deferred to her in every small decision. I figured it was just new love, that it would settle. It didn't settle. They got engaged about 18 months after they met. He called me on a Tuesday night to tell me, and I could hear her in the background laughing at something. He sounded happy, genuinely happy. So I said what any father says, "That's wonderful, son. I'm happy for you." And I meant it. The problems didn't start with the engagement. They started with the house. About 2 months after the ring went on her finger, my son called me with a proposition. They wanted to buy a house. A real house, not an apartment, before the wedding. He'd found a place in Dublin, Ohio, a suburb of Columbus, good schools, nice neighborhood. The asking price was $312,000. He didn't have enough for the down payment. Now, I want to say something here, because I know what some people will think. I should have said no. Maybe, but here's what you have to understand. This was my son. The only child Donna and I had. And Donna had told me in those last weeks, "Make sure he's okay, Ted. Whatever happens, make sure he's okay." So when he asked for $60,000 toward the down payment, I didn't say no. I want to be clear about how I had that money. I'm a retired electrician. I worked 31 years with the IBEW, Local 141. The money wasn't inherited, it wasn't a windfall. It was 31 years of showing up in steel-toed boots at 6 in the morning and not missing days. Donna and I had always been careful. We lived below our means. We paid off the Clarksburg house in 2009, 14 years early, because Donna said she never wanted a bank to own more of our home than we did. That $60,000 was real money to me. But I wired it. I drove to the bank. I sat across from the woman at the desk. I watched the number leave my account, and I told myself, this is what fathers do. This is the investment that matters. My son and Vivienne closed on the house in April. She sent me a photo of the two of them on the front steps, holding a little sign that said, "We're home." My son was grinning. I printed that photo and put it on my refrigerator. That was 22 months before she told me to disappear. The first signs were small. They always are. The first Thanksgiving after they moved in, I drove up to Columbus, 5.5 hours in my truck, and Vivienne's parents were already there when I arrived. They had the guest room. I slept on the pull-out couch in the basement. I didn't say anything. I figured it was just logistics. First holiday in the new house, not a big deal. Christmas that year, I wasn't invited at all. My son called and said Vivienne's family had a tradition of spending Christmas in Florida, and they'd already booked it. and maybe I could come up the week between Christmas and New Year's. I came up on December 28th, stayed 2 nights, drove back. The whole visit, Vivienne was pleasant but distracted. She kept checking her phone. At dinner the second night, she asked me, not unkindly, but directly, whether I had thought about selling the Clarksburg house and simplifying. I was 61 years old. I'd lived in that house for 23 years. I said I hadn't really thought about it. She nodded like I'd given the wrong answer on a quiz. The second year, my son called in February and said they were going to redo the kitchen. New cabinets, new countertops, a full gut of the space. He said it would run about $38,000, and they were a little stretched from the mortgage. He asked if I could help with half, $19,000. I said I needed a few days to think about it. He said, of course, take your time, and I could hear something in his voice. A tightness like he was expecting me to say yes and was slightly annoyed I hadn't said it immediately. I thought about calling my brother-in-law, Donna's brother Raymond, who'd always been straight with me, but I talked myself out of it. I didn't want to look like I was going behind my son's back. Instead, I called a lawyer in Clarksburg, a woman named, well, I'll just say her name was Patricia, a real estate attorney I'd used years ago when Donna and I did our estate planning. I told her the situation. She listened. She asked a few questions. Then she said something that changed everything. She said, Ted, before you send another $1, let me draft a simple co-investment agreement. It doesn't have to be adversarial. It just needs to document what you've already given and what you're giving now. And it needs to establish that your contributions create a partial ownership interest in the property. I told her I didn't want to make things awkward. She said, it's already complicated. You're just the only one who doesn't have it in writing. I slept on it. Then I said yes. Patricia drafted the agreement. It wasn't aggressive, it was clean and fair. It said that my $60,000 down payment contribution and any future contributions would constitute a documented equity interest in the property, proportional to the total purchase price. It included a clause that said if I was ever asked to vacate or remove myself from the family by either party without cause and mutual consent, the agreement would trigger an option for me to either receive repayment of my contributions within 90 days or retain my documented equity stake. I called my son. I told him I was happy to help with the kitchen. I said I just wanted to formalize things a little, given the amounts involved, and that my attorney had drawn up something simple. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Dad, this feels like you don't trust us. I said, Son, I trust you. This is just paperwork. It protects both of us. He said he'd have to talk to Vivienne. He called back 3 days later and said they'd sign it. I wired the $19,000 the following week. The kitchen ended up beautiful. Vivienne sent me pictures, white quartz countertops, custom cabinets, a farmhouse sink she'd been wanting. I got a Christmas card that year. First time in 2 years. The wedding was set for September, outdoor ceremony. Venue outside Columbus. About 200 guests. My son asked me to give a toast. I worked on that toast for 3 months. I had a legal pad in my nightstand, and I'd write things down at 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. Things about what it meant to watch him grow up. Things about Donna and how proud she would have been. In June, 3 months before the wedding, my son called. He said Vivienne's parents wanted to bring her grandmother from Portugal, and the grandmother needed a ground floor room, and the only ground floor room in their house was the guest room, and could I maybe not plan on staying with them during the wedding weekend? I said, so where would I stay? He said there was a Hampton Inn about 6 miles from the venue. He'd already looked into it. He could reserve a block of rooms and I could book one. I booked the room myself. Didn't say anything about it. 3 weeks later he called again. This time it was about a rehearsal dinner deposit. The venue wanted $2,200 to hold the date, and they were a little short that month. Could I cover it, and they pay me back after the honeymoon? I covered it. They never paid me back. I didn't ask. I figured it was a wedding gift. Then came August. I drove up to Columbus to help with some things. assembling outdoor furniture they'd ordered, a few electrical things around the house, since that's what I know how to do. I stayed in the Hampton Inn. 3 nights. Vivienne was polite but quiet. My son seemed preoccupied. On the second night, the 3 of us sat on the back deck after dinner, and I remember Vivienne looked out at the yard and said, "We're really thinking about adding on a sunroom, maybe a bonus room above the garage." I didn't say anything. She said, "It would be nice to have more space. We're planning for the future." I still didn't say anything. My son said, "We'd need to figure out financing, but we're looking at our options." I drove back to Clarksburg on a Sunday. 60,000, 19,000, 2,200. I did the math in the truck, $81,200 over 2 years. I wasn't bitter exactly. I just started to feel a shape forming that I hadn't seen before. The call that changed everything came on a Wednesday afternoon in September, 3 weeks before the wedding. My son called. He didn't say hello the way he usually did. He went straight to it. He said, "Dad, I need to talk to you about the wedding weekend. And about some stuff going forward." I said, "Okay." He said Vivienne had been feeling, he used the word, overwhelmed. He said she felt like my presence in their lives created a certain kind of pressure, and that she'd talked to a therapist about it, and that the therapist had suggested she needed to protect her energy going into the marriage. I said, "What does that mean, son?" He said, "It means we think it's better if you don't come to the wedding." I heard it, but I didn't process it immediately. I said, "What?" He said it again. Same words. I said, "You're telling me not to come to my son's wedding?" He said it wasn't like that. It was just that tensions were high, and Vivienne needed things to feel calm and clean, and maybe after the honeymoon things would settle down and we could talk. I said, "Did you just disinvite your father from your wedding?" He didn't answer that directly. He said he knew it was a lot to ask, and that he appreciated everything I'd done, and that he hoped I could understand. I said, "No." He said, "Dad." I said, "No. I'm not doing this over the phone. I'll drive up Sunday." He said that wasn't a good idea. I said I'd see him Sunday and hung up. When I got to their house Sunday afternoon, it was Vivienne who opened the door. My son was in the kitchen. She stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door half closed behind her, like she was keeping something contained. She said, "Ted, I know this is hard, but I need to be direct with you." She said my son needed to start his marriage without the weight of complicated family dynamics. She said I had a way of making things about myself. She said the healthiest thing for their future, for their family, was for me to take a step back and let them build their life. Then she said the thing I'll never forget. She said, "Honestly, Ted, the best thing you could do for us right now is just not be around." She said it gently. That was almost the worst part. Like it was practical. Like she was recommending a different route to avoid traffic. I looked past her at the door. I thought about the white quartz countertops in the kitchen, the farmhouse sink, the house itself with my name on a legal agreement I'd quietly filed with Patricia 8 months ago. I said, "Okay, Vivienne, I hear you." She looked a little surprised. I think she expected me to argue. I didn't. I got back in my truck. I drove 6 miles to the Hampton Inn, the same one I'd been staying in all summer. And I sat on the edge of the bed in room 114, and I called Patricia. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I said, "Patricia, the situation I described, it's happened." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me exactly what was said." Patricia called me back the following Tuesday morning. She'd reviewed the agreement, pulled the county property records, done the math. She said, "Ted, when you signed that agreement and it was executed by both parties, you established a documented equity interest of approximately 24.3% of the property's purchase price, based on your total contributions relative to the original sale price." I said, What does that mean practically? She said, it means if they want you out of the picture, they have to make you whole first. Your documented contributions, $60,000 for the down payment, $19,000 for the kitchen renovation, represent $81,200, not counting the interest that's been accruing under the terms of the agreement. I said, they could just ignore it, say it doesn't apply. She said, they could try. But the agreement was signed, notarized, and I recorded a notice of it with the county assessor's office when it was executed. It's attached to the title. They can't sell or refinance without addressing it. I asked her what I should do. She said, nothing yet. Give it 2 weeks. Let them think you've accepted this quietly. Then I'll send a formal notice. I did nothing. I didn't call my son. I didn't reach out to Vivienne. I didn't go to the wedding. I spent that Saturday, the day of the ceremony, sitting on my porch in Clarksburg in the September air, drinking coffee and watching a pair of cardinals in the birch tree Donna had planted the year we moved in. I thought about the toast I'd written, 3 months of 2 in the morning notes on a legal pad. I thought about driving it out to my fire pit and burning it. Instead, I folded it and put it in the drawer of my nightstand. Maybe someday I'd give it. Maybe not. Patricia sent the notice 14 days after the wedding. She addressed it to both my son and Vivienne, via certified mail to the Dublin property, with a copy to the title company that had handled their closing. The letter stated that under the terms of the signed co-investment agreement, which she attached in full, my contributions constituted a recorded equity interest in the property. It noted that I had been verbally requested to remove myself from the family relationship by the co-signatory Vivienne, without mutual consent and without cause. It stated that this triggered the option clause, which gave them 90 days to either repay my contributions in full, with interest per the agreement, or acknowledge my equity stake in writing. The total, with the agreed interest rate applied, was $89,400. My son called me 40 minutes after the certified letter was delivered. He said, "Dad, what is this?" I said, "It's the agreement you signed, son." He said, "This is insane. You're suing your own family." I said, "I'm not suing anyone. I'm invoking a clause in a document we all signed. There's a difference." He said Vivienne was furious. He said I'd blindsided them. He said this wasn't what family did to each other. I said, "Son, I need you to really hear what I'm about to say. I gave you $81,000 over 2 years. I was told by your wife on your front porch that the best thing I could do was disappear. I did not file a lawsuit. I did not call a single person in our family. I sent a letter, through an attorney, reminding you of an agreement you signed. That's all this is." He went quiet. I said, "You have 90 days. I'm not trying to take your house. I'm not trying to hurt you. But I'm also not going to pretend that what happened was acceptable." He hung up. For the next 6 weeks, I didn't hear much. Patricia got a call from a Columbus attorney who represented my son and Vivienne. There was some back and forth. They initially tried to argue the agreement was informal and not intended as a legal instrument. Patricia pointed to the notarization and the county recording and let the silence do the rest. Then I got a call from Vivienne's mother. I hadn't expected that. Her name was Helen, and she'd always been polite to me. Nothing warm, but polite. She called on a Sunday afternoon, and I could tell right away this wasn't a hostile call. She sounded tired. She said, "Ted, I owe you an apology. I didn't know what was happening with the money. My husband and I didn't know the full picture." I said, "I appreciate that, Helen." She said, "Vivienne has a way of... She doesn't always share things fully. With us, either." I didn't say anything to that. It wasn't my place. She said, "I think my son-in-law loves his father. I think he got turned around somewhere. I hope this doesn't end things between you two." I said, "I don't want it to end things. That was never the point." She said she'd talk to her daughter. I thanked her. My son called on a Thursday night in December, about 10 weeks after Patricia's letter. It was past 9 o'clock. He didn't start with anger. He started with silence. I let it sit for a moment, and then I heard him exhale. He said, "Dad, I'm sorry. Not I'm sorry but. Not I'm sorry you felt. Just I'm sorry." He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking. He said he'd had some conversations with Vivian and some on his own, and that he'd talked to a counsellor twice. He said he'd let himself be steered in a direction that he knew wasn't right, and he told himself it was just keeping the peace. But that keeping the peace with one person while burning down everything else wasn't really peace at all. He said, "I let her talk to you that way. I was standing right there and I didn't say anything. That's on me." I sat down at my kitchen table. I had my hands around a coffee mug and I was looking at the refrigerator, at that photo, the one of the two of them on the front steps, holding the little "We're Home" sign. I said, "I know you love her, son. I'm not asking you to choose." He said, "I know. But I need to be someone she can actually respect, and that means not doing what happened." We talked for almost 2 hours that night. About Donna, about when he was a kid, the years I was working long hours and sometimes missed things, and how I thought I was making up for it by being available later. But later doesn't always work the way you plan it. About what he actually wanted his life to look like. At the end, he said, "What happens with the legal stuff?" I said, "I'll talk to Patricia. There's a way to restructure it that's fair to everyone. Maybe you make payments over time, something manageable. I'm not trying to put you in a bad position." He said, "That's more than we deserve." I said, "Yeah, well, you're still my son." Patricia worked out a modified agreement in January. They'd repay $30,000 over 3 years, and the remaining equity interest would be dissolved and reconveyed to them clear. It wasn't everything I put in. But I hadn't done this to get everything back. I'd done it to make sure I couldn't be made invisible without any consequence at all. There's a difference. Vivienne and I have had exactly one conversation since all of this. She called me in February, on a Tuesday evening. She was not warm, but she was honest. She said she'd handled things badly. She said she'd had her own fears and resentments, and she'd let them run the whole situation. She didn't ask me to forgive her. She just said what she said, and let it be. I respected that more than I expected to. My son and I have dinner now when I drive up to Columbus, about once every 6 weeks. Sometimes it's just the two of us. Sometimes Vivienne is there and we talk about safe things, the yard, the neighborhood, whether the Buckeyes have a chance this year. It's careful, but it's real. I finally put a porch swing on the Clarksburg house last spring. Hung it myself. It took me about 3 hours, and I got it slightly crooked the first time and had to rehang it. But I got it right eventually. I sit on it in the evenings now when the weather's good. Donna would have liked it. I've thought a lot about what Patricia said to me that first time, when I called her before signing the second agreement. She said, "It's already complicated. You're just the only one who doesn't have it in writing." I used to think that was a sad thing to say about a family. Now I think it was just true. And there's something to be said for the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Maybe especially then. I didn't disappear. I'm still here. And I still have the toast in my nightstand. The one I wrote for the wedding I didn't go to. Maybe someday I'll read it out loud somewhere. Maybe at a birthday or a holiday or just some ordinary dinner when no one's expecting it. I've got time. I've had a lot of time to sit with all of this. Long drives back to Clarksburg. Long evenings on the porch. Long nights where I'd wake up at 2 in the morning and just lie there, staring at the ceiling, running the whole thing back from the beginning. And what I keep coming back to isn't the money. It's not the $81,000 or the legal agreement, or even that moment on the front porch when Vivienne told me, in that calm, practical voice, to stop being a part of my son's life. What I keep coming back to is a simpler question. How did I let things go that far without saying a word? Because here's what I figured out, slowly, the hard way. There's a version of kindness that isn't really kindness at all. It's avoidance wearing a generous face. For 2 years, every time I felt something was off. Every time I drove home from Columbus with that uneasy feeling I couldn't name. I told myself I was being the bigger person. I told myself I was keeping the peace. What I was actually doing was making it easier for people to take things from me, because they knew I wouldn't push back. Not speaking up isn't grace. Sometimes it's just cowardice with better intentions. My son isn't a bad person. I believe that completely. But good people can get turned around. They can get comfortable making small compromises, staying quiet when they should speak, going along when they should stop. Until one day the person looking back at them in the mirror is someone they wouldn't have recognized 10 years earlier. He stood on that porch and said nothing while his wife told his father to vanish. He didn't do it because he's cruel. He did it because he'd spent 2 years practicing the habit of not pushing back either. We were both guilty of the same thing, just in different directions. What Patricia said has stayed with me. It's already complicated. You're just the only one who doesn't have it in writing. I think about that beyond the legal context. How many times in life do we walk into situations where everyone else has already made their calculations, already decided what they're going to do, already made their plans, and we're the only one who hasn't? Not because we're naive exactly, but because we want to believe that love is enough of a contract. That history is enough. That giving freely, without conditions, is its own protection. It's not. Caring about people doesn't mean surrendering your judgment about them. The hardest thing I've learned from all of this isn't about Vivienne. It's about myself. I was so determined not to be the difficult father, the overbearing presence, the man who couldn't let his son grow up and build his own life, that I overcorrected into invisibility. I made myself so easy to push around that eventually pushing me all the way out the door felt like a natural next step to someone who'd never met any resistance from me. You can love people generously and still have a spine. Those two things aren't in conflict. In fact, I'd argue now that real love requires both. The people who love you best aren't the ones who never push back. They're the ones who stay honest even when it's uncomfortable, who hold their ground because they know that relationships without any weight on both sides eventually tip over. I still have that toast in my nightstand. 63 pages of legal pad. 2 years of 2 a.m. thoughts about my son and what I hope for him. I don't know if I'll ever read it out loud to anyone, but I know now that I wrote it for me as much as for him. Writing it was how I stayed clear about who I was, even when everything around me was trying to make me smaller. I'm still here. Still Ted. Still the same man who worked 31 years in steel-toed boots and paid off a house early and put a slightly crooked porch swing up by himself last spring and got it right on the second try. That's enough. That's more than enough.